live from New York. Welcome everyone to National Black MBA weekly digital series presented by the New York Metro Chapter. Today we have a wonderful opportunity to learn more about how entrepreneurs could increase revenue, increase strategy, and look at various models do licensing. And we have a special guest today with us who I'll introduce in a couple moments. So some housekeeping rules. We have a live chat that we'll be monitoring throughout this conversation, so please feel free to add your questions within the live chat. In addition to that, there'll be portions throughout this presentation where we'll also ask for any feedback in terms of any questions you may have in the various topics that we're going to discuss today. The Metro New York Chapter National Black MBA is here to serve all the needs of our members and our network by providing economic and entrepreneurial activities or resources to help their businesses grow and launch. We also have a strong focus on mentorship with our high school mentorship program, and also career and professional development opportunities in the New York metro area and now nationwide. Today's topic, as we celebrate our 50th anniversary for the National Black MBA, focuses on licensing strategies for entrepreneurs. Our guest today is known as the licensing guy. Brenner is an IP professional with a passion for innovation, startups, and businesses of all kinds do licensing by using IP, income-producing products, services, and technologies to really help transform industries and give opportunities for entrepreneurs to develop their business. For decades, he has experienced a gamut of from medical devices to food technology and consumer packaged goods. Rand is a CEO of Licensing Consulting Group. He's out in California today, but of course he's welcome to New York anytime. He also holds an MBA from Playboun in California, from LA, California. So without further ado, I want to welcome Brent to this conversation. How are you doing today, Rand?
Great, thank you, Norville, and thank you for inviting me out here. Very excited to be able to share with your membership and your participants about licensing. I always welcome that opportunity, and I think that as you and I were talking, it's certainly we face some challenging times ahead. So I think that the subject matter is very appropriate. And today I hope to be able to show you some options and opportunities that I think exist for everybody out there. And without further ado, why don't we jump into it?
So yeah, let's definitely get into it. I know we have a presentation. And I know that we live in times right now where entrepreneurs, small businesses are looking at their business models, are looking at opportunities for them to either change or look at ways that they can pretty much stay afloat. And I'll ask everyone, if you're on mute, if you can put everyone on mute for a quick moment. Thank you very much. All right, good. I know from an audience perspective, we want to know who you are, and more importantly, how did you become the licensing guy, and how did you get into this lucrative industry?
That's a good question. People always ask me that. Let me put the screen up there because I think visuals are always a good way to go with this. So let me begin, and that's a good starting place. So let me take you through what I'm going to be talking about real quickly is a bit of the history, innovation in the economy, some specific licensing strategy, how it works, and then of course a summary. So let me get started in answering your question, Norville. How did I get into this business? By accident, which is what happens to a lot of folks. I got my start in the business back in the 80s in the entertainment business. And it was at a time when licensing was not what was called one of their front end or dominant business models. It was really a situation of they had a movie and they weren't sure it was going to sell in the movie theater. So they decided that they had to make some money with it. And the way that they thought they would do it is through merchandise. So when I joined, they were producing the first movie, the first installment of what's now a big franchise called Batman. And when I was, when I got into it there, it literally was a situation where I was contacted by somebody I'd previously been in advertising. They said, would you like to come over to the movie studios? I said, sure. And they said, what do I do? And they said, well, we're doing licensing. And it wasn't much of an interview because in those days there were no people in the licensing industry because it literally didn't exist for the movie studios. So I was brought on board, and we were tasked with going out and trying to find companies who would make stuff around the first Batman movie. And in those days, it was pretty much anybody could walk in and get a Batman license for a few $1,000 to make some products around. And that's really where I got my start. And then what happened is over time, that movie started to build. And when the movie released, it went like a bat out of hell. And suddenly all the movie industry woke up to the realities of what merchandise was about and very quickly ramped up. And now, of course, today, merchandise is a big chunk of the income that comes into all types of entertainment, from movies, TV shows, video games, you name it. But it was not always that way. And since then, licensing has become a very active strategy in a lot of other industries as well, particularly since the introduction of the internet has really been a boom for intellectual property, as has a lot of changes that have gone on in around the world with countries getting their intellectual property law house in order, which I'll talk about in a minute. So that's really how I got my start. And while I was there, had an opportunity. I also worked at Saban Entertainment, ran the licensing division for Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and put together t-shirts, hats. Sure, I don't know. I'm sure if you've had kids or maybe you grew up with this, but action figures and t-shirts, shorts, pasta and candy and gummy bears and hats and fast food meal packs and you name it. That's what got built around a lot of these movie entertainment properties. And now, of course, it's big business, and you see these movies that become more or less just giant commercials for all the merchandise that's sold, and it's become a very large business. And after that, I left, set up my own consulting business, decided to get on the other side of the desk where it seemed like there was a lot more money, and have since been involved, focused more on technologies than on the entertainment side, and work quite a bit with a lot of medical device companies, non-medical device companies, consumer products companies. So it really runs the gamut. The services that I provide, a lot of focus on the licensing out, managing that entire process for companies. Companies bring me on, they have their intellectual property, and the licensing services that I provide are the strategy, planning, packaging up the IP, figuring out how to license it, developing the licensing package, developing the outreach campaign, reaching out to the companies, researching who the companies are, targeting them, reaching out, sending them information, and basically managing that outbound flow of information and moving it through to discussions, negotiating the deal, and then ultimately closing a licensing deal and managing that contract. So that's
Rand, let me ask you a quick question to jump in there. So there's something that you said that was pretty interesting. You had a lot of years of professional experience before going into your own consulting business. Now, we have many members, and most of corporate America is struggling with the question of, when is it time for me to do something on my own? When should I go into entrepreneurship? So this wasn't something that we discussed, but you hit something that I kind of want to make sure we touch on right now. What was that pivot point that you said, I need to go ahead and do this on my own?
Well, and it's actually a good question, and it's one that I'll come back to further on, but really, sometimes you stumble into an industry or an opportunity and you see it from a perspective of, let's say, working inside a big corporation. And I work with a lot of entrepreneurial companies and small startups who came in and used licensing, and I saw them build their business, make a lot of money. And at the time that I got into licensing, it was very entrepreneurial. It wasn't a mature business inside the studio. So in a lot of ways, it was a lot of fun because there wasn't a lot of politics, a lot of, things that happen as businesses or divisions inside corporations merge. And then after spending a decade working in the studios, I saw that, there's really an opportunity on the outside to be working beyond just entertainment content and also working for a large company. I mean, I think the experience is valuable, but at some point, if, working inside a large corporation isn't really ultimately what you want to be doing, then the idea of setting up shop on my own, because I figured, okay, there's a lot of intellectual property out there. Why not go out and do it? Now, it's interesting that you bring this up, because the one thing when I started my business, I figured everybody understood intellectual property and licensing. And much to my surprise, just about any company and inventor that I met really did not understand intellectual property and licensing. And in fact, you know, initially when I was building my business, I had spent more time and still spend time educating companies, educating inventors, educating potential clients about intellectual property and licensing, and using that education process so that they can, one, get an understanding of it, and two, see the value in licensing. And that continues to exist today. It's intellectual property and licensing is a subject that, well, first of all, it's not taught in any school or university. On the legal side, it is. You can get lots of legal education about it. But the actual management of it, because intellectual property, remember, and I'm going to be talking about this, is an asset, and you have to understand how to manage it. So when I went into the business, as often is the case when many people go into business, you discover things out there that impact what you're doing and how you have to do it. So that was the incentive for me to go off and start my own business.
Now, I know you're going to talk about the historical impact in terms of IP and how all this boom. A lot of people talk about every time there's an economic downturn, businesses, look at their business models and try to reinvent themselves. But it might go further back than we think. Is that correct?
It does. And that's a good point here, because you have to understand we've been here before. As we're looking out, I'm not saying we've been here with a pandemic like we have, but the point is we're headed into an economy that is on the decline. But we've been here before, and one thing, in Norville, you and I have discussed, is you have to really reach back and take a look at the last time we faced a global situation of this magnitude, which was really back in the 1930s. And the one thing that you have to understand is that when that situation occurred, and there was massive unemployment, much like we're facing today, there's a significant slowdown in businesses, financing came to a halt. Solutions had to be found to help promote and to get the economy started. And one of those was the recognition by the government that intellectual property was crucial to that. And so as part of the recovery acts that were put in place, one of those was expansion of intellectual property law, because they understood that that economies are built on IP. And this has been documented for decades, is that intellectual property. In fact, if you look at the most economically advanced countries, it's those that have the most mature intellectual property laws have seen the greatest advancements. And that's why in the last 15, 20 years, countries such as China and India and Southeast Asia, Central and South America and Africa have all gotten their intellectual property laws, house in order, because they realize and they've seen that intellectual property is the driver of the economy. And so even at a time, and that takes, looking back at the Great Depression, that is what was recognized. And so as part of the government's program to help get the economy going again, intellectual property was a big part of that. And they went in there and they passed intellectual property laws, particularly around trademarks and copyrights, to enhance and expand the provisions of that law. And by doing that, they actually encouraged industries to start. If you look back in the Great Depression and the question you said about, when's a good time to start a business, believe it or not, the 1930s depression saw more startups and more innovation created than any other time, in a decade. A lot of that, reason for that is a lot of people got laid off, so they had no choice to start it, but also because intellectual property laws had expanded. So, for example, copyright law was really expanded, and that set off a boom in the media industry, particularly the movie industry. So you had studios like 20th Century Fox and Warner Brothers and many others that started in the 1930s during the Depression. They also enhanced trademark law. And what that did is it set off a whole industry of developing consumer brands, luxury brands, which sparked more consumer purchases of products because now they were able to use trademarks to help differentiate those. So what you saw in the 1930s was actually an increase in intellectual property, an increase in the investment of it, even through the legal system to help encourage businesses. And the reason for that is because what has been the case historically, what is the case now, is that IP-intensive industries are the most resilient in an economic crisis. The reason being is because they have the innovation, they have the intellectual property. Mm-hmm. And right. When you look at research studies that have been done, and they've been done for decades, in the last series of recessions, what they've documented is that IP investment actually stays the same or increases, while tangible investment, meaning plants, equipments, real estate, offices, massively fall off a cliff. As you're seeing now, what happens is there's a contraction in the employment force. They don't need the office space. They don't need the manufacturing. They don't need that. But what they do need is the innovation. And this is where the opportunity is for anybody and everybody watching this presentation, is you have to understand what's going to bring us out of this is the same thing that brought us out of this in the 1930s. And even before that, back in the 1800s, there were several recessions that occurred. And each time it was inventions, intellectual property, and innovation that was a big part of moving us out of that and moving forward. And the reason that the investment in IP increases is because many of these entrepreneurs realize that if you can get through the downturn, when the upturn comes, you're going to be positioned to take advantage of that. And so that's why today, many of the biggest names that you see out there, many of the companies, some of the largest supermarket chains like Republic's, all started in the Great Depression, more out of necessity. For example, a grocer, the founders started a grocery store because they figured at the very least, we'll have food to feed ourselves and we can sell extra. But it's that kind of thinking that enabled them to continue going forward. Another perfect example is, I told you about, is movies. Then there was modern conveniences that came out, like the washer and the dryer, which GE had put out. But the problem was the Depression came, so nobody could afford them. Well, that's when the laundromat was born, because you had smart entrepreneurs that said, well, look, if nobody can afford the washing machines, why don't we just set them up in a common place and let people go and rent them for a few pennies?
This is definitely the time. So this is definitely the time to pay attention to what's going on in the industry, in various industries, and figure out how can my idea change the way we do things without the burden of capital cost.
You hit the nail on the head, without the burden of capital costs. Because remember, what happens in this downturn, just like it did in the Great Depression, people still need things. It's just they're not spending discretionary, but they need better services, better products, better technologies to solve the issues they face in a down economy. Monopoly was a game that was born because people were home and needed entertainment. The double feature, when you go to the movie theater, remember, I don't know if you remember double features. There used to be double features. Well, what happened is the movie industry was taking a beating, the theaters, just like they are today. So they came up with an idea. What if we throw in 2 features for the price of 1 and get people down here for half a day? That's where that came from, out of necessity of figuring out how do we shift our business model. And it goes on and on and on, because it was these innovators who realized we have to come up with solutions that fit what's going on in the market. And that will occur as well as we go forward, is to understand it's the innovators, the inventors, both companies and individuals, that can create the kind of solutions that people are going to need going forward. So, and you have to realize that it's not only in a depression, but the history of intellectual property for the United States goes way back. In fact, it's in the United States Constitution, because the founders of this country realized that intellectual property is what was going to build the country. And they realized that when they founded the country, wrote the independence, and broke from Great Britain, that they needed incentives for innovators and inventors to create stuff so that the United States could build its own industry. Because without innovation, you can't build industry. So
Right.
It's no coincidence that the first head of the Patent Office also became the third president of the United States, Thomas Jefferson. And that's a big part of what goes on. Excuse me, I didn't realize this was going to be going off like that.
It's okay. We're only live across the world.
I understand. So that's it's inherent inside of our country, as well as other countries, this whole idea of intellectual property. And what you see is that IP has been around because, as I said, we went back to the Great Depression, but keep in mind that these IP rights have moved forward for over 200 years in this country, but they go back much further than that. Intellectual property goes back hundreds of years. And I'll share with that at the end to just give you an idea of just how extensive that is.
Yeah.
The other important point to understand is that there's been a wealth creation shift in the world. Okay. It used to be in the 1950s to the 90s, all about hard asset, real estate, oil, gas, things like that. But in the 21st century, that suddenly shifted. And you can tell by just looking at what the most valuable companies are today. You have companies like Google, Facebook, Microsoft. Okay. These aren't companies that have lots of plants and equipment producing all sorts of products. They do produce products, but it's all predominantly intellectual property. And so what's happened is the shift has been from tangible to intangible. When you look at the Forbes list of wealthiest individuals, within the top 10, over half of them have built their fortunes on intellectual property. So this shift has been occurring, and it's been happening more and more. And licensing is the strategy that many of these companies use to build their fortunes, as is intellectual property. And it's important. Go ahead.
No, so I just want to make sure we understand. So when you talk about, like, before we get into the strategies themselves, so let's want to make sure we understand. From a strategy perspective, you're saying that companies like Google, these IT companies, it's not necessarily the services they provide, but it's the way they do it, which is their intellectual property. Is that on the nail right there?
Absolutely about their intellectual property. And it's what they do with that intellectual property. See, that's the key. And you brought up a good point. You say, especially when we have capital constraints, finance constraints, money. Everybody always thinks I need money to make my business go. Well, that's not the case. This is where licensing comes in. See, intellectual property is an asset that can be used many ways. And you don't have to have money to use your IP to make money. And that's what we're going to be talking about, a couple of strategies. And that's what's important to understand. A lot of people don't, because they've never been educated in that. Many often think of intellectual property as just a product or a service.
Right.
But it's not. And it's important to keep in mind, as I showed you that wealth creation, that what is happening and will happen at even a faster pace is the economy is shifting. We're moving away from a tangible economy of competition, which was on physical assets, where I'm going to build and sell, and I'm going to make money selling this single product or service. And we're moving toward what's called an intangible economy, which is one of cooperation, where you're forming partnerships and alliances using intangible assets, predominantly intellectual property. And you're creating multiple revenue streams. So it's almost as thinking of it this way. I make it, and you make it, and I get paid when you make it and when I make it. Because by licensing others, you can license them and get paid a piece of what they sell, as well as using your own product to sell directly, if that's a strategy you choose to use. But that's the kind of economy we've moved into. And now it's accelerating because, as I said, the IP laws have really matured around the world. And when you step back and really think about intellectual property, you'll realize you're in a world surrounded by intellectual property. In fact, we're talking on and we're presenting and seeing each other on intellectual property. Everything that you wear, eat, touch, listen to, drive in, okay, it's all intellectual property. It's all intellectual property. You can't get around it. In fact, more cases than not, it's bundles of intellectual property. The smartphone, for example, your phone here, this is not simply owned by Apple. Apple licenses bundles of IP, the screens, the LEDs, the GPSs, okay, the internal components and circuitry, that's all licensed. And in fact, they formed what's called patent pools, where they put what's called essential patents together because if they didn't pool patents together, because these technologies are developing so quickly, these cell phone companies would spend all day litigating against each other instead of making phones. So they create a pool where everybody gets paid. One of the, and these pools of IP didn't just start now, they go all the way back to the 1800s in what's called the sewing machine wars. At one time, the sewing machine was the cutting edge technology. And there were a number of sewing machine patents out there and companies making them. And what ultimately happened is, to stop the litigation, they forced them to come together and pool their patents, because sewing machines were creating huge industries, clothing industries, apparel industries. But in order for them to be able to operate, they had to pool the patents. The same thing happened in the 1930s as technologies for airplanes evolved. And then as the US got closer to World War II, they took all of the aerospace or airplane technologies and pooled them, because they knew that they would need lots of companies to be able to access those technologies to make planes. The same thing exists today, as I shared with you about the phone, but every time you watch a video, one of the largest patent pools, the MPEG pool, gets paid a royalty every time you watch a video, and they make billions of dollars. So once you start to recognize that the world is IP, it opens up a whole new set of opportunities for you that you never thought about.
So it's really about making sure we reposition our minds.
That's
exactly, and open our minds to the opportunities.
That's exactly it. You hit the nail on the head. It's about getting out of the tangible mindset that says, my IP is only this product, or my IP is only a service, is to understand, no, it's an intellectual property that has many applications in many ways that it can be used in most cases. And the other thing is, realize IP is big news. If 20 years ago, you didn't read about very little, if any, IP litigation. Today, every day, you will read about IP litigation. And you say, why are you reading about IP litigation? Because that's indicative of where the economy has gone. Today, you've got people like Apple and Microsoft and Ericsson, and you name it. And they're in constant litigation lawsuits, not small lawsuits, for tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. And they're not litigating each other over products, they're litigating each other over their patented technologies. That's how huge this has become. And even when you look at some of the biggest acquisitions that have occurred in the last 10 and 15 years, those acquisitions, and I'm talking hundreds of millions, even billions, are not for plants, equipment, offices, desks, any of that. None of that. What they were acquiring is these huge, valuable patent portfolios, IP portfolios.
So let's stay. Yeah. No, yeah, absolutely. Let's stay on that, because now we're talking about a concept of a historical impact. And I think the example that you laid out is where I believe it's going to help reframe our minds in terms of, well, now that we understand that a lot of our members understand M&A, we understand why companies why our companies acquire other companies for that particular idea, for that particular resource. Let's look at some of the strategies, because I know our viewers really want to know, well, okay, how do we make this tangible? So what are some of the, let's go over some of the strategies, the the many strategies that we have across the industry.
Okay. Let me take 1 second just to review IP to make sure everybody's up to date with
Sure.
it. Very quick. Basically, IP consists of 2 types. There's registered and unregistered. Most people, I think, are familiar: patents, trademarks, copyrights. The other side is trade secrets and know-how. Now, this has become a very, very big part of the intellectual property world in licensing, and in fact, is some of the most valuable. It's a big part of what's going on with the tariffs and trade wars with China right now, is the trade secret and know-how. So I bring this to your attention just so everybody is up to speed in understanding the types of IP. We won't get into a lot of details because I do want to get ahead to the strategy so people understand. Because it's these IP rights that are really the most valuable, more valuable than the underlying product. And understand, inside every business today is IP. It's all about IP, the most valuable asset, the balance sheet. Every person listening and viewing today has IP or is working with IP, okay? And everything in your business is IP. Now, this is important to understand because, again, IP takes many forms. Many people aren't familiar with it, but I would encourage anybody who's on this presentation today, if you have a business, you need to go in and do an audit. You need to get a spreadsheet out and do an inventory of your IP, because that is going to be the first step towards you being able to take advantage of what we're talking about from a strategy standpoint. And what you see there is just a very simple format, but it's called an audit, and basically it's taking accounting of all your intellectual property.
And I'm going to ask everyone, if you're on the call, can you please go on mute, or can we just put everyone on mute for a moment, please?
There we go. Okay, so let's jump into the strategies. Why is licensing the innovation strategy for economic downturns? Okay, the 3 biggest reasons. 1, there's a huge appetite for licensing and collaboration now. And this has been borne out by a survey that was done, a global survey done in the last recession. Basically what happens is these big corporations turn to licensing partnerships and collaborations for their R&D because the market is changing very quickly. It's shifted. They can no longer manage that process quick enough. So now what's happening is the appetite for licensing is opening up big time. And it will be opened up in a bigger way once we get out from this lockdown and into doing business. The second point is, why is licensing such a strategy that's going to be increasing? Because what's going to happen now is what's called specialization focus. No longer are we going to be in a market. See, when you're in a market with constrained financial resources and capital, it means you have to focus on your other strengths. That's what specialization is about. So let's take the example of many of these large companies like medical device companies. They've got the marketing set in place, the sales channel set in place, the production set in place. They've got all of that set in place. But what they need is innovation to fill that pipeline very quickly. So they're going to focus their specialization on what they're good at doing, and that's delivering products to the market. The same thing exists in every industry. You may be good in the marketing side, the sales side, whatever the case is. The point is that licensing is a strategy that now allows you to start forming partnerships and specialize in your area of strength, if you will. And that's an important concept to keep in mind, because it means now, instead of going out saying, oh my gosh, I got to raise money because I got to get my marketing in place, my sales, my distribution. No, you don't. You need to take your IP, focus on getting it into the market through a partnership of companies that already have those capabilities in place, and allow them to focus what they're good on so you can focus on what you're good on. And the third point is, why is now an ideal time? Is because, as I've mentioned before, for the first time in history, unlike the past depression, there's global, what's called harmonized IP laws, meaning that 70 plus years ago, most of the countries a lot of the countries were not participating in IP, such as Asia and Africa. Today, just about the whole world is participating, and that means the opportunity for licensing is opened up 1,000-fold, because you have to remember, IP has no boundaries. It can flow anywhere. There's no restriction, and you don't have to physically go and be present to be able to do these deals. That's why the internet
Right.
was a boom to licensing, because for the first time, you have the ability to communicate and connect. So let's take a look at some strategies. And one of the first strategies I want to introduce you to is Bill. I think everybody recognizes this guy. Did you know that Bill started his business in the last bad economic recession downturn of the late 70s? But here's the thing. Bill understood licensing. And the way he got his business started, he didn't have any money to promote his new operating system. He had none. So what he did is he figured out a strategy. He went to IBM, who had come up with the personal computer, but didn't have an operating system, and basically said, look, your operating system sucks. Nobody will use it. How about this? How about if you use my operating system, stick it in every one of your computers. I'll license it to you. You put it out with every one of your computers. And what he did is he carved out one thing. And what he carved out is he said, but I get the right to sell it under the Windows brand. And that's what he did. So what happened is he didn't have the money. He formed a partnership. He went to IBM, who pumped it out in millions of computers. Well, guess what happened when it was time to upgrade that software? Guess who they had to go to?
They had to go through him.
They had to go to Bill. And the rest is history. That skyrocketed Windows 3.0. He wound up selling millions, and then eventually moved out of that deal because now the company was up and running and he didn't have to finance it with millions and millions and millions of dollars. I share that story because it's a very important story to understand. This is a guy who was doing licensing at a time when nobody was thinking about it, but that's how he got his start. So when you think about the strategy playbook for licensing, you have to understand it's a big playbook. And Norville, you and I discussed it. We're going to focus on 3 of the strategies, but I want you to understand there's literally a dozen strategies that you can use with licensing. Some of them cross over one another, but there's many, many ways you can use licensing. And really, when I say licensing, use your IP. There's many ways through licensing to use your IP.
And before we go into the actual strategies, because this is going to be the heart of the conversation, just let everyone know there must be like 23 plus strategies. We're going to go and we're going to cover about 3 of them, and then we'll get more information out. But we want to make sure, is there any questions in the queue that we can answer right now before we go into specific strategies?
Yes, there's one question that came in, and it's really, people want to know, how do they get into the IP business? That was the main question that came in.
Yeah, before we get into strategies, let's answer that question briefly before we go into the deep dive in these 3 strategies.
Yeah, it's a good question, okay? I'd say really everybody has some form of IP, unless maybe you've just been employed and you don't have any IP. But here's the beauty about intellectual property. You can get into the intellectual property business with or without IP. So you don't actually have to own IP to be in the IP business. There's a huge need for people to work with IP owners and represent them in going out, because the licensing market is very fragmented and there's very few people that really are out there working with small businesses, entrepreneurs, even mid-sized businesses, and helping them figure out how to use their IP. Or you could be an IP owner and you're in the IP business. I mean, in effect, every business is in the IP business. And one of the strategies we're going to talk about is how you shift your businesses. And understand this, for a lot of businesses today, it's going to be about shifting your business to become an IP innovation company as opposed to a make and sell business. And we're going to talk about that. But in effect, everybody is in the IP business. They just don't realize it, or they may not recognize it, or you may not even understand your IP, because even if you have been working in a consulting firm, or you're a coach, or you're a business advisor, you have intellectual property. It's called know-how. And that can be packaged up and is being packaged up. So the answer to that question is you're probably in the IP business, you just don't know it. So,
and Ren, let me just also add to that, Ren, before we go into the strategy. So my experience in IP was being responsible for the Disney and the Nickelodeon products at Kraft Mondelez. As a brand, being in brand and being in products, I had opportunity to work with the Disney company to learn about how we use their property, how we take their characters, whether it was Avengers, if it was Universal Studios, it was about Disposable Me, and how we take those products and making them into cookies. And through that process, and also working with Hershey, Kraft, and Jump Off Marshmallows, that was another way for me to understand how do I use their products, put them in my products, and then also figure out, okay, how do we track the licensing? How does revenue come in? How do we ship products in? The lawyer conversations with lawyers, conversations with their legal counsel. So that's from a tangible perspective. From an MBA perspective, coming out of B school, those are some of the things that you're going to have. You're probably going to be working, if you're in finance, you're going to be working with other firms as well. There's a number of contracts that you're going to sign. That's also IP, what Rand is talking about as well. So it is both corporate and it's also self, which is entrepreneur or small business as well. We're going to, in these strategies, it's going to help, again, get your mind to think about all the possible opportunities because they actually are endless, correct?
They really are because, and that's the nice thing about intellectual property. I mean, obviously some IP is very limited in terms of its application. Like maybe it's a source code for a specific piece of software, or maybe it's a particular invention for a product, but there's many types of intellectual property that actually have multiple market applications, different ways they can be used, different ways they can be reinvented and used in the market. It's a very fluid asset. And again, and Norville, you hit the nail on the head. Once you get past the tangible mindset and start understanding what intellectual property is, you realize that there really is an unlimited way of using it if you can understand strategically how to apply it. And that's what we're going to talk about here, is share a few of those strategies. And one of the, first one I want to talk about is new revenue opportunities. And this is the one that's used predominantly by companies everywhere, and that is create new revenue opportunities. Many times you have a particular market you go after, your direct market, yet your technology has other market applications, such as different ways it can be used, okay? Or maybe different customers. Maybe your direct market is the small to medium-sized businesses, but you don't have a sales force that can handle the Fortune 500. That's a market that you're leaving untapped, yet you could license a company to go after that market. So you have to understand that what licensing enables you to do is to take your IP and put it to work. And if you have other market applications, why not put your IP to work, licensing it to another company to go after those markets? You don't have to leave them hanging. And this is the true opportunity that is in front of you today. Let's say you're a business, you've been in there, and then suddenly, now you're at the point, you have your intellectual property, you've been making products, technology, software. Suddenly we're closed down, and we don't know when we're going to open, maybe another 4 weeks. And when you reopen, your challenge is, well, now I've got to get restarted again, and I've got to get out there. I've laid off most of my sales force. How am I going to get them back, et cetera? Well, here's the opportunity that license offers you is maybe what you do is you sit down and evaluate and you go, you know what, maybe there's a better way to do it this time. Maybe I should be partnering with companies that have already got these people in place. Maybe it would be faster and better and cheaper to start this partnership, let them run with it and get a percentage from them. So that's one way that you can be thinking about licensing. And believe me, companies everywhere are hungry for good quality intellectual property, technologies that are proven, products that are proven, services that are proven that they can run with right now, because that's going to be one of the biggest challenges coming out of this thing is where am I going to find good quality innovation that I can run with right now? So as far as revenue opportunities, that's probably one of the fastest ways to find new revenue opportunities.
So let me ask you a question. So let's say I'm a baker. I have a bakery. My storefront is now closed, because of obvious reasons. So let's say I create, let's say, brownies or another ingredient that can be used for other things. Can that be an opportunity for licensing? Can I take that and say, hey, I don't have my bakery anymore, but I have an ingredient or a specific pastry that can be included into something else, and then sell that? Is that an example of like new revenue opportunities?
It absolutely is. Recipes are trade secrets, meaning you have a certain recipe, you have the ingredients, a certain way you combine them that makes this super duper tasting brownie or this super puffy croissant. And what happens is there are other people out there, other bakeries that are looking. Perhaps they don't have brownies. Perhaps they don't have croissants. They have to invent their own recipe. Recipes are a good example because it's not easy to come up with something that people come back over and over and over again for. You know, you've probably experienced it. You find a store that has these just awesome croissants and you're there every week getting your croissant. Yet there's 20 other places you could go for a croissant, but you're not going there. Why? Because they've got a recipe that appeals to you and tastes great. Well, that recipe is valuable and it can be used and licensed to others. In fact, you know, when you look at some of these well-known restaurateurs like Wolfgang Puck, they took their recipes, their know-how, their designs, they licensed them out to create huge revenue by letting others use their recipes and their formulations. So that is absolutely something you can do. And that's a good example of putting on your thinking cap and saying, wait a minute, I'm going to be opening up, but I'm not sure I can get this bakery going again. But what if you were very successful with your brownies or your croissants? Then somebody else will be looking for those brownies or croissants, because a lot of innovation and IP is about solving problems. And somebody else who's looking to expand their recipe of brownies or croissants has got a problem. And your IP, your recipe, could be a solution for them. That's why they would license it. So just to hold on that. So just to make sure I understand. So that's not necessarily B2B. That would be more licensing. Just to make sure that's clear to everyone. Well, that's not necessarily B2B, but it's... Licensing is really B2B. I mean, you're taking your IP and you're going to another business, although there is B2C licensing as well, which is predominantly subscription-based that you get with, let's say, software, an end-user license. In fact, everybody on this presentation today has been doing licensing. They just don't realize it, because every time you buy a computer and you start it up and you load a piece of software, what's the first thing that pops up? The end-user license agreement. And I'm sure you read every word of that, sign off on it, and never share that software with your buddy who calls you up and says, hey, Norville, my computer just crashed. Can you send me over a copy of Outlook?
We don't do that.
Oh, no. And I'm sure you remind them, no, I can't do that. I sent an end user license agreement which prohibits my sharing. The point is, everybody's doing licensing today because of the nature of what IP is, whether it's on your phone, whether it's on your computer, even watching a movie or a TV show today. At the end of a movie, what pops up, and sometimes at the beginning, is a big copyright notice. So we're all involved in licensing at some level. But again, this is something to think about if you're looking for a way to get restarted or generate revenue sooner rather than later. Then taking your IP and licensing it to somebody else is a great strategy. The next strategy, and this is one that probably a lot of people are going to be thinking about, is using it to shift your business model. Now, I'll use the example of production. There's many companies that are in the production business. They're making something. In this case, it's a company that makes polyester, spandex, and nylon. They have created this manufacturing process so they can produce it and sell it to the people that use spandex or nylon or whatever it is. But they didn't do that. They shifted their business model and said, look, instead of spending the money to set up the equipment, buy the resources, produce this material, and then sell it separately to these companies, let's take the whole process and let's license it to the different industries who need this process. So they changed from a production company into a license and innovate company. They said, let's just license them our production process. Let's give them the technology. Let's license them our technology that enables them to make the type of material they need for their products. And let's focus on enhancing our innovation and licensing it to other industries. Well, this is the same thing that anybody watching today, if you have a business and you're making and selling something, and when I say make and sell, it doesn't have to be a tangible product, it could be intangible, like consulting services or coaching. You can shift your business by repackaging it and moving it out into a licensing model, where instead of you having to actually deliver it, you become the innovation company and you license it out to others to let them use it, to let them produce it, let them sell it and pay you royalties. That's how you shift your business model. And you see many companies that have done that. Another example is many of the most well-known apparel brands, such as Tommy Hilfiger, Calvin Klein. Okay, they don't make anything anymore. They shifted out of their production business and they are 100% licensing business. All they do is license out their brand, manage the brand, and make a lot of money without the overhead. That's another example of companies that have shifted out of the production business into the licensing business because they realized that there's more money and less risk in allowing others that specialize. Remember I talked about that specialization focus? That specialize in making certain types of apparel than there is trying to do it all ourselves. That's another example of companies that have shifted out. And it goes on and on and on of companies that have shifted away from the make and sell into the license and innovate. And as we go forward and come out of this lockdown and start having to get back into the market, one of the things that you should be thinking about is, can we take our IP and is there the ability to shift over to a license and innovate? Now, keep in mind, this shift doesn't have to happen overnight, but you can start by licensing pieces of it out until eventually you move your business completely over to a licensing model. That's how many of the businesses make that transition, by starting to use the licensing and then licensing more and more of their revenue, okay, as opposed to making and selling it. Nokia got out of the cell phone business. They licensed their cell phones. Qualcomm gets 50% of their business because they don't even make their chips anymore. So these
even if I was a fashion designer, so just make sure. So even if I was a fashion designer and say, I don't have the infrastructure to make these clothes, make the amount of quantity that I want, but I know how to design. So now what I'm doing now is shifting my model from, let's say, creating these designs and producing them, but now I'm contracting with people, let's say, who have that equipment and getting that. I think the average, what's the average percent of royalties we're talking about? 5%, 7%?
Well, that's a good question. I would say use the rule of thumb at 5, but it fluctuates depending on product margins and things like that. I mean, it could be much higher. You know, when I was in the entertainment business, licensing consumer products, it was 8 to 10. Technologies tend to be 3 to 5%. So it varies. But the most important thing to understand is even at 5%, if you, let's say, as you said, you're a fashion designer, if you focus on making these great designs and enhancing them and keeping your licensees moving forward, and you license it at 5%, that 5% is coming back in without the operational overhead and the expenses. So it's going right to your bottom line. Yeah, it's going right to your bottom line. At the end of the day, if you were to look at the balance sheet between handling all the production yourself, and by the time you got done with the expenses and carrying it to the bottom versus licensing it, you'll find that they're almost equivalent in terms of what you're getting your return on. Except with licensing, it costs you a hell of a lot less and with a lot less risk than trying to do it all yourself.
I know we're close to the time here. Let's go to our third strategy, and then we'll open up the Q&A.
And so the third one now is, and this is a little more sophisticated, but it's happening more and more. And this is where you convert from a standalone product to a service or vice versa. Say, what do I mean about this? Well, there's a lot of examples of this. And one that's been growing a lot is subscriptions. Okay, that's where product-based companies are trying to figure out, how can I make more value to this and create a recurring revenue? See, when you sell a standalone product, you make one sale at a time. And that means you have to go back and resell again to the next customer, again to the next customer, and again to the next customer. But if you could find a way to get them to pay you recurring revenue, you don't have to resell to them every time. So, for example, one of the things that's been coming up are what are called these boxes, where you get a box of stuff. One of them is loot. And they stick stuff in this box, all this merchandise, and you get it every month, and you pay for it every month.
Yeah.
So now, instead of sending you one product, one t-shirt, they're sending you a bunch of products. But you subscribe to it because you're getting a bunch of different stuff every month. That's one example. Internet-enabled devices. Okay, if you're a producer of maybe a medical device or a home device or a security device, the opportunity here is if it's internet-enabled, you can add a subscription piece to it. But you have to remember, it has to be value added. So you have to do more than just saying, oh, pay me to monitor your data. This is where you add in additional services, and you see this happening quite a bit. The second aspect of this standalone product or service is unbundling and licensing your product or service to specialized providers. IBM is a huge company. You've known them as a computer company. What you may not realize is they have created a whole bunch of products and services, and they've unbundled them, and now they license them out specifically. They have HR software, they have legal software, they have research software. They have taken everything and unbundled it. They license out all of these different solutions to different specialized industries. And what that does is it enables them to drive more demand for their computer products to use this software on. So that's one example of how they unbundle. And you see that happen a lot with some of these larger technology platforms is by specializing it, unbundling and then specializing it, you actually drive greater demand for your product or service. And the third way that you can do it is, let's say that you're a consultant. You can license a product to combine with your consulting services. Let's say you're a consultant in accounting, auditing specifically, okay? And you have a system that helps companies do a better job of auditing and finding ways of identifying where there's some problems with costs or expenses. Well, what if you license an AI document analysis system to go with your auditing system? So now what you're able to do is go in and say, look, not only do you get auditing, but we have a solution to manage all of your paperwork, all of your documents. You can do this document analysis, because what happens is when you offer them a product with your service that they can use over and over again, now your service becomes a value add because they've got this product that's helping them solve a problem. So you've just bundled your service with a product. So these are three examples of how you can take your IP, and by either licensing in or licensing out, you can create a recurring revenue stream from licensing.
This is some great information. Again, to our audience members, there are a number of strategies that are available. I want to kick it over to Kavern. Kavern, let's go to the queue for questions.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Thank you so much for that wonderful discussion. So I have one person that's asking, is disruptive innovation a formulation of unique IP? So if you have, let me repeat that. Is disruptive innovation a formulation of a unique IP?
Yes, you really have two aspects to developing IP. There's what's called disruptive and incremental. Probably 95% of IP is incremental, meaning it improves some current technology, service, product, whatever the case is. Then there's disruptive. For example, Microsoft Windows was a disruptive technology when it entered the market because it was a new operating system that created a whole industry. Social media platforms, when they came on the scene, were disruptive because they created a whole new way of communicating. Algorithms, search engine algorithms, such as Google, came on the scene and disrupted the whole industry in terms of the way that you find information and create information. So these type of disruptive IP, while not common, have the ability to be very, very valuable in terms of what they create. They literally spawn new industries or sub-industries within industries.
Let's go to another one, Kavern.
Sure. So someone wants to find out, if you could discuss design versus utility patents. So is one more strategic or profitable than the other?
Well, conventionally thinking, most thinking is utility is more valuable than the design, because the design is really protecting the way something looks from its product design or its user interface versus utility, which is the actual functional aspect of it, the way that it works. So utility is always be considered more valuable, but that's not necessarily the case. It depends on the industry. For example, in the apparel industry for a while, design patents were very valuable because apparel and fashion is all about design. That since is kind of gone by the wayside because of the expense of it, but it all depends on your industry. So, and sometimes, and this is overlooked, sometimes getting a utility patent and adding a design patent to it can really enhance the value of both patents.
Okay.
Let's go to another question, because there's one big question I want to ask you, but let's go to another question first,
Yeah.
Karen.
So the final question I had was, hold on, let me just bring this up. They would like you to recommend any good books out there that you read to learn more about IP or, strategy and how to practically apply for an IP. Do you have any books that recommend or any recommendations, website?
Well,
don't you have a book that's out?
I do. I was going to say I would recommend my book. I published it last year. It's called Hidden Wealth: The Money-Making Power of Licensing, and it's a step-by-step guide to making money with intellectual property. And I wrote it because, as I said, I've spent a lot of time educating IP owners about IP and licensing. So I finally wrote a book. It's not a long book. It's just very straightforward on what are the steps from starting with protecting your IP all the way through the licensing process and into contracting and managing your licensees. So it's an excellent starting point, and it's on Amazon. You can simply just type in my name or Hidden Wealth, Rand Brenner, and up it'll pop, and I encourage you to get it. It's a fast read, and it'll get you up and running in no time.
Okay.
Now, thank you, Kevin. Before we kick it off, before we close off this session, because again, there's a lot of fruitful information here, let's just end with this. Can you just let us know what are the key 3 people or the key 4 people that we need in order to maximize, let's say, licensing strategy?
The people, you mean outside people or?
Correct. Whether it be lawyers, accounting, things of that nature.
I would say that if you're not familiar with licensing and IP, then, a consultant such as myself would be the right kind of person that you'd want to bring in, because it's really giving you somebody who's got the expertise and know-how of what IP and licensing, but more importantly, can see the opportunities of your IP. I mean, many times clients come to me, and one of the first things I do is, as we talk through their intellectual property, I ask them questions, because many times you don't see a lot of other applications of where the value is. Sometimes I get clients that come in and say, oh, it's my device that's really valuable. And then I ask them about the back-end algorithm, and they suddenly talk about it. And I say, well, wait a minute, what are you going to do with all the data you're collecting? Because that's really valuable. Or they may be looking at, hey, this device is only for the consumer market, but as we talk about it more and more, it's got application to the veterinary market. So one of the things that you need to do is really work with somebody that can help you flesh it out. Now, there are, IP attorneys do play a role, an important role in licensing, but they're more from the legal perspective. And generally, they're not going to be looking at it from the business development and licensing opportunities. So you have to make sure that you're working with somebody who can help you really on that business development and where are my money-making opportunities.
Great. Now, we went through 3 strategies. We went through the historical impact to IP. What are your last comments before we close off? What do you want to leave the audience with?
Well, I think the thing to understand is, first of all, I'd like to invite you to join. Next week, I'm going to be putting on a deep dive workshop called Licensing Strategies to Survive and Thrive in a Down Economy. And it's going to get into, this was just a preview, but I'm going to be getting into more of those strategies. It's much longer, it's 2 hours. And the reason that I'm doing that is much like we're doing here, is to open up people to thinking about IP and the opportunity it presents. But I would say for anybody here, one of the first things I would encourage you to do is, going back to that slide I showed you, get a spreadsheet out and do an inventory of your IP. Figure out what you've got, because this is what you're going to be able to use as we move forward and going out into the business market. And there's other things that you need to be thinking about, especially if you've had employees. You may have trade secrets and things like that. Employees are going to be shifting. You could suddenly see a lot of your customer lists or your formulations or whatever suddenly show up at your competitors. That's why you've got to do a list. So that's one of the first things I'd say. And then the second thing I would say is, as you're planning for looking at what you want to do as we come out of this thing, really give some serious thought. How can I use licensing? What should I be thinking about in licensing, and how can I apply it to what I have? Because I think what you'll find is that partnerships, especially through licensing and strategic alliances, are going to probably be one of your best strategies for moving through these challenging times that are coming from an economic standpoint.
Well, Rand, we want to thank you very much for providing our members with key strategies on how they can look at licensing strategies to help grow their business as entrepreneurs, for them to identify opportunities within their own business, but more importantly, how to best educate themselves. We will send out a survey to everyone with Rand information and additional information on how you can get involved in the next deep dive, which includes about 23 strategies that will be crucial for you in order to enhance your ability to maximize your income. On behalf of the National Black MBA Metro New York Chapter, my name is Norville Barrington, also the chairman of Barrington's of Brooklyn Holding Company. I want to thank you so much for attending today's webinar.